Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of our Thrive in China Roundtable. This is going to be our last episode. We're going to go on a summer hiatus and come back in September, fresh and renewed, with the remaining topics for the fall season. To start off today's roundtable, it's the usual general slides that everybody knows about. For those of you that are new to the roundtable, we're always asking our audience, are you a newbie to China? Are you a startup in China? Or are you an experienced China hand? This always gives us a little bit of insight in terms of who our audience is and helps us to then tailor make our presentations accordingly. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I have over 18 years of experience in the corporate services and corporate administration world in China. I'm one of the leading experts on inbound investment into China. And I've worked with over 600 international companies in regards to their market entry strategy, their pre-investment strategy, their implementation, which is really our core service, as well as then how to grow and scale in the market. We have developed around 8 or 9 different administrative process videos giving insight to foreign investors on what they can easily do as part of their checklist to make sure that their foundation in China is solid and sound. And if you're interested in looking at these videos, message me at christina@woodburnglobal.com and I'll send you the link to these videos directly. For those that haven't received a free copy, we do want to say thank you to our community and offer you a free publication, which is the 10 biggest mistakes companies make in China. Again, email me at christina@woodburnglobal.com and I would be more than happy to give you a free version of this ebook. So we're starting off roundtable number 21 today, which is how to recruit and employ your first hires in China. So everybody could be at a different stage of their China journey, but at some point you might have the realization that you need people on the ground to support your business, to help you to grow, to help you to scale. And the question is, how do you find those people? How do you then employ those people, especially if you're not in a stage where you want to set up an entity yet? And what do you need to understand in regards to labor regulations so that you don't make any mistakes? So let's get cracking. So before we start today's presentation, I want to highlight to you the pain points that I had when I first was hiring in China. And just to say, these are generally the pain points that most people have when they are hiring their first group of hires in China. We didn't start off in China with 100 staff members. We started off in China with myself. I relocated, and then I slowly built my team with the first person I hired, then the second, then the third. And as our business scaled, we then added more and more people to the team. My pain points were the following. One, and before I begin, I want to say that when I say pain points, ultimately, these are the mistakes that I made, okay? And so I want to add these inside just to highlight this is where improvement needs to happen from you as the person in charge of hiring these people on the ground, okay? So the pain points that I had was, one, the lack of transparency with the team. I had not provided clear guidelines on reporting format, not provided clear guidelines on weekly calls or daily calls. I had not provided guidelines on KPIs. So as a result, I did not know what they were doing, didn't even know if they were performing, and I had absolute no transparency or clarity. The next was a lack of understanding and language capabilities. Now, I had less of a problem in this. I see this more with other clients of mine that have never grown up in Asia or never lived in Asia. There's always this cultural barrier, language barrier. I always made sure that the English level of the team that I hired was impeccable, because at some point I did not want to be the one communicating with the clients directly. At some point, your team has to take over, right? If you hire people that you yourself can't communicate with, what's the point? It's going to lead to a lack of communication, a lack of transparency, and all of these issues that follow. So understand the cultural barriers, understand the language capabilities, and make sure you have solid communication. Now, communication for me was not really a factor when I was living there on the ground, because I saw the staff every day. It became a factor more so when I was relocating out of China during COVID. And I realized that instilling communication modes, whether it was through Zoom, Microsoft Teams, emailing, WeChat, whatever it was, there had to be a guideline in terms of what communication modes we were going to be utilizing, what were the company policies on those communication modes, and then getting calls booked in the diary ahead of time. The next two are really in relation to money spend, okay? Spending more money on less quality, spending less money on less quality, right? We are all aiming to hire quality staff. And what I need people to realize is that the labor market in China has been getting more and more expensive, particularly in the tier 1, tier 2 cities. Labor costs are not what they used to be. It is not a cheap labor market, especially if you're looking for administrative staff, senior managers. It is getting more and more expensive. So one, you have to understand what is the market rate for certain positions. You also have to understand what are social insurance benefits, housing fund benefits. And you have to understand what's the quality that you're getting out of these staff, right? The more people you interview, the more you're going to understand about quality levels. Make sure you've got a balancing act and try and get those final candidates validated by an external party that you can see that you're spending the right amount for the right quality. Points 6 and 7 for me really came into the picture again during COVID and during the fact of the whole remote working, a lack of trust and a lack of loyalty. But that really only developed because of points 1 to 5, which was the lack of transparency and clarity over what they were doing, a lack of understanding and language capabilities, not instilling a proper communication methodology, and just not checking on the quality and skill set of those individuals. It all led to a lack of trust and loyalty. Now, the key thing that I see with clients of mine is ultimately, because you are probably sitting abroad, you're appointing people to be on the ground, you have no idea what they do all day. Are they really working 8 hours in the day? Do they really come in the office on time? What are they doing every single day for those 8 hours that they're on the job, or 10 hours, or however long they're supposed to be working? In order to have an idea of what they're doing, you need to make sure that those pain points do not exist from points 1 to 7. You have to instill a work methodology with your team on the ground, a communication methodology in order to understand what they're doing all day. So these are generally the pain points that I have had, that clients have had as they have been building up their teams in China. And obviously there are going to be more, right? I just made a short list of 8. Now, in my opinion, the most important hires you'll make are your first employees. Because generally these are going to be people that are more qualified to do more things for you as you're building up the business. So how do you spot a good one? How do you spot a good hire? And I've listed here 4 characteristics. You want somebody who's a generalist. You want somebody who's got no ego. You want somebody who's a believer, and somebody who's got grit. And I want to explain what these 4 characteristics are, okay? Now, your biggest pain point right now might be marketing and branding. But what would be your pain point in a week's time, or in a month's time, or in a year's time? In the startup phase of having a company in China, you need well-rounded employees who are willing to roll up their sleeves and figure out how to do anything and everything. They have to have a mindset of flexibility. Now, the best early hires I made at Woodburn could transition seamlessly from being CPAs and accountants to acting as brand ambassadors and presenting to an audience of 100 people. They didn't care about their titles. They were open to pitching in wherever they were most needed at that moment in time. Now, while it might seem counterintuitive to hire an accountant who has got deep expertise in a specific industry or sector, why that is less important than having somebody who can do anything and everything. For me, I wasn't going to build a team of 100 people from day one. I needed people, 2 or 3 initially, excuse me, who were going to be flexible and who were going to be generalists and open to helping me wherever I needed help to grow the business. Okay. So when you are interviewing people for these first hires, are they bound by the job description? Are they bound by their expertise? Or are they believers who believe in the vision that you are creating, that they are just willing to help anywhere and everywhere? Even if they don't know how to do it, they're still going to be open to learn to how to do it. Okay. So it's really important to have somebody with this mindset of being flexible to grow, to ultimately grow the business. So are they generalists? The next is ego. Okay. When I moved to Shanghai, I was 22 years old, and we're a family-owned business. My father and brother sent me over there to build it. And my dad once told me, you know, if you knew what it took to start a company, you'd never do it. And I didn't know. I was extremely naive. I was extremely innocent. And I was relying on him and his expertise to get me through it. Building a company in China is hard. Growing and scaling a company in China is hard. The market is complex and you're a foreigner in that market. So there really is no room to have any form of ego, whether literally or figuratively, okay? You've got to make sure that people want to work for you, that people are willing to admit their mistakes, that people are keeping their feet on the ground and are humble, okay? You want hard workers, again, I'll repeat it. You want hard workers who are going to roll up their sleeves and push to the extreme in order to get that company up and running and to get that business up and running. We don't need egos. We don't need arrogance. We don't need somebody saying, I know everything, because nobody knows everything. Impossible. All right. The next is believers. And this really comes from you explaining what your vision and what the goals are of the company in China. In the earliest days, your success isn't tangible yet, right? What people are seeing as a startup, they're probably going to check how much capital you have to invest, that you aren't going to go bankrupt from day one. Otherwise, what's the point of working for you? And they're only going to be able to get their motivation to work for you through you. So you have to have a shared vision. You have to have a shared mission in order to be able to sell to them what you're going to actually achieve. Okay, and you've got to put the skeptics aside. You've got to really hire those that want to grow the business with you. And the last but not least is grit, right? And by grit, I mean, you want somebody who's going to move mountains to get this business up and rolling. Now, growing up, I was a competitive swimmer, and one of the best lessons that it ever taught me was grit. No matter how your race went, whether you did your worst time imaginable, I had to get up the next morning and go back to training and keep pushing myself in order to hit my goals and hit my achievements. Not every day was rosy and stars shining. There were days that were extremely tough. There were sleepless nights. But once you have committed to something, you have to push forward regardless of the pressure. And let me tell you, there were moments building up the business in China where I didn't sleep at night, where I wasn't sure if financially we could move forward. I didn't know if we were going to keep clients, had such a mess with the first hires that I had. But the saying goes, when the going gets tough get going, right? And you need to have somebody who has that type of personality who's going to bring that to you. You've got to find these 4 characteristics in the people you're first going to hire in China. So the question is, how do you find them? How do you find this right talent? So where to look, right? Now, there's a lot of different places to look. I'm going to give you my opinion on each of these. You can go to the job search portals, 51job.com, China HR, Zhaopin, etc. Plenty of job search portals. Downside is, in order to be able to work with them, you need to have a Chinese entity and you need to have a business license. So kind of a vicious circle there. Another option is LinkedIn.com. LinkedIn China platform, LinkedIn.cn, is closing down. Actually, I just tried today to look it up, and it directed me directly to .com instead of .cn. LinkedIn.com is still accessible. You can still find Chinese people who are based in mainland China on LinkedIn. Okay, you don't have to go to the .cn website for that. So you can always use that as an avenue. Then you also have the Chinese social media platforms. You know, who are you connecting with on WeChat, etc., to see if people might be interested in you. Using that network also to say, hey, we're looking to hire. Would you guys out there know somebody who would be interested? And then obviously the final resort is recruiters and headhunters, who are going to charge you a fee to be able to recruit or headhunt suitable individuals. Now, personally, if I could go back in time, in order to save my time, I would have budgeted and paid for specific recruiters and headhunters to find certain people for me, do the vetting, fulfill the qualifications checklist, and do the grunt work. I spent so much time initially doing all of that work myself, which prevented me from focusing on the business. So I would have put something in my budget at that time, which I hadn't done, to use recruiters and headhunters to really find those right one or two individuals that I was going to hire from day one. And the beauty is you only have to look then at 5 people, interview 5 people, or 3 people, or how many ever they find for you, and filter then from down there. So you're not doing that grunt work. Remember, when you are setting up the business, most of the grunt work and administrative work falls on your shoulders. This is one area you can just eliminate that. Thousands of recruiters and headhunters out there. I'm not a recruiter or headhunter. I only do recruitment for finance positions because that's what our core business is. And we do want all of our clients eventually to have their in-house finance teams. So I only do that because we have a database ourselves when we recruit people internally. But otherwise, we don't do business development roles or engineering roles or anything like that whatsoever. But it just helps to use recruiters and headhunters to do that type of vetting process. But these are the avenues that you can utilize. And obviously, having a network, finding out through suppliers or distributors if they know somebody that might be interested is also other avenues that you can use. Now, before you start recruiting, what I do want people to do is a little bit of homework, okay? The first piece of homework is understand titles in China, understand salary levels that match those titles, understand the working experience that matches those titles and salary levels, and what the education level is. You can Google China salary guideline, and you will have at least 5 or 6 things pop up on your first page that are free of charge, that are up to date, and that are salary guidelines mainly for the tier 1 and top tier 2 cities. It is a great understanding. Now, all these salary guidelines will look different company to company, but they give you insight. Now, I say this because there are still a lot of people who think they can find labor cheap, which is not the case. And you first need to start off with understanding how expensive the labor market has become. Now, in these salary guidelines, what you need to observe is that social insurance and housing funds are not included. So this is something that would come on top, and you need to check for that. Then the next thing that I want you to do as a homework piece is create a profile of your company, create a profile of the job description, and create a profile of the skill set that you need in order for this job to succeed. You can't do any search without having that, right? Because you have to provide a job description in order for people to be applying with you. So make sure you do your homework and think very carefully, how do I want to portray my company? What is the job description? What are the KPIs? or requirements, responsibilities. What is the title going to be for the role? And again, skill set. What skill set do you actually need? What are the characteristics that you need from these people? The next point is how to pick the right talent, right? So obviously you're using one of these avenues to find people. You've got a job description and you've got a beautiful layout presentation of what you're looking for and who you are as a company. You understand the salary guidelines. So how do you pick the right talent? Okay. The key thing is understanding what characteristics are you looking for. Okay. So resumes are provided by the candidates. You always have to take that with a pinch of salt. Verify all of that content during the interview. Ask questions about various aspects. With senior managers, you might even want the headhunters or recruiters to do background checks. If you're not using that, you may want to get somebody to do a background check on those individuals. And the most important, even in Zoom calls or Microsoft Team calls or WeChat calls, observe the candidate's demeanor during the interview. Are they shy? Are they brash? Are they harsh? Do they ask a lot of questions? What questions are they asking? Remember that you may have to convince them to work for your company, but look at how they are portraying themselves to you. And do you think that's a right fit in terms of working together? Now, for most of you that are not going to be based on the ground in China, but you're going to be based abroad, doing Zoom or Microsoft Team meetings is vital because that is the communication mode you're going to be utilizing in the future to communicate with them. So understand their demeanor, understand their language capabilities. For me, there were times that I interviewed people, it was like pulling teeth to get information. And when that happens, I give up. So after 10 minutes of starting the call, I say, thank you, you're not the right fit. We're going to end the interview. Simple as that. Okay? We don't need to waste time, especially when you're interviewing so many people. So make sure that you look at their demeanor, you observe their behavior, you understand how they're answering questions. Do they also understand you when you're speaking English or any other language? Or do you have to constantly interpret what you're trying to say? Okay, make sure you're really observing that. You really also have to screen for aptitude, attitude, and language capabilities. And language capabilities is not just spoken, it's also written. Okay. So aptitude, it's really looking at the key skills that the right candidate must have. Like I said, do your homework. What skills are you looking for? And use a checklist to say, out of a scale 1 to 10 for each of these skill sets, what level do you believe they are at? Okay. Attitude. Testing is really important. You want to see whether they have grit, whether they are believers, whether they, what were the other items that I highlighted? Whether they're generalists, whether they have no egos. You want to test for that in the interview phase, right? And you've got to use different interview techniques to find that out. You have to also be very careful about what questions you're asking them. So as part of your homework, also prep about 10 questions in order to gauge an understanding of what their attitude actually is like, right? And you want to see their reactions during these Zoom or Microsoft Team videos, or even if you're doing it live on the ground in China. How do they react to these questions, right? And last but not least, especially for senior management roles, give them a project, right? First of all, you then gauge their interest level in working with you. Recently, we did this with a client for a finance role, and there were 5 people that were in the final round. And I can tell you, one guy just blew everybody away with the formatting of their presentation, how in depth they had gone. I mean, you can tell that this guy worked on this presentation for a solid 3-4 days. Others were so flaky, a little bit here, a little bit, like they hadn't taken it seriously. Okay. So you can give them an actual test assignment, or you can also say to them, depending on the role, you're going to start in my organization. What would be your action plan within the first 3 to 6 months of joining? Create a presentation highlighting these action plans. Or you can give them a business model and say, here's a business model. I want to see how you're going to analyze these figures. Present to me the key facts that we need in order to make a decision on how we're going to grow and scale, and give me suggestions on how you would grow and scale the business, right? There's a whole variety of things that you can do in terms of tests and assignments. Then you're going to go through these projects, you're going to go through these interviews, maybe interview 4 or 5 different people, and then you have to finally choose a candidate, right? And in some instances, it might be really hard. They might all be fantastic. Or in other instances, it's going to be really easy. One is the highlight and the star, and that's it, right? So I want to give you a couple of tips on how to choose the final candidate. And number one is go into final negotiations with more than just one candidate. Why do I say that? Because some candidates change their minds at the last minute, or some candidates start negotiating for extras also at the last minute. And that might come out of your budget, meaning that not feasible whatsoever. So having backups will really help. So when you've interviewed 5 people, let's say, scale them. Who's number 1, who's number 2, who's number 3, who's number 4, and who's number 5. And do not let anybody know the outcome or the situation until somebody has actually signed the offer letter and signed the contract, okay? Then you can let the others know, sorry, we've chosen somebody else. We've had a fantastic time talking to you. We would love to stay in touch. Leave always the door open, right? Make sure you've got that backup plan. Point 2 is always think about your key objectives for the next 3 years. What needs doing and which milestones need to be achieved successfully, right? And again, the key objectives should come out in the presentation or the project or the assignment that they're going to be doing for you. Do you feel that they can reach those key objectives based on that presentation that they've done? And then obviously, point 3 is the cost benefit ratio, right? What is your budget for this role? Remember that your budget needs to be reasonable according to market rate. If they ask for slightly more, they're fantastic. Do you keep them? That's an internal decision that has to be made, okay? The next point is how to employ your first hire. So actually, you've got now a candidate. How do you physically employ them in China? Okay. Now, I want you all to understand the key considerations when hiring people in China. Point number 1 is that you need to have an entity in China to hire people. Okay. Freelance agreements between, I don't know, the UK, the US, and China? No. Okay. This is a very gray area. You're going to get yourself into trouble. You need, if you're hiring somebody who's going to be residing in mainland China, you need to have an entity in China that hires them. You also need to realize that a local written employment contract is required. The Chinese courts want to see hard copies of these contracts if there is a breach and you go to court. You have to also understand that the labor law is highly protective of employees versus employers, and this causes difficulties then when you go to termination. We always recommend mutual termination agreements, but you have to understand that these contracts have to be bulletproof and help to protect you, okay? Fixed term agreements are common in China. So if you hire somebody, you can say, okay, we're only going to sign a 1-year contract. You just have to realize that a 1-year contract means a 1-month probation period. A 2-year contract is a 2-month probation period. Open-ended contract, you can have a probation period of up to 6 months, okay? The regulation in China is that you can sign 2 fixed term employment contracts. The third one then has to be indefinite and open-ended. Although you sign an employment contract, you should also think about signing an employee handbook, which will help you should you come into any form of labor dispute, okay? And point 6 is understanding that although there is a national employment law, there are going to be discrepancies or slight differences based on provinces and municipalities, okay? So where you're hiring them and what you need to know about that is make sure you have that knowledge level, okay? Now, options for starting that employment relationship. What options do you have in terms of employing them? So the first option, obviously, is establishing your own company in China and hiring those individuals through this company. The other alternative is if you set up a representative office or you want to sign contracts that are for less than 1 year, you can engage with a labor dispatch agency to hire those individuals for you. For a representative office, you can only use a labor dispatch agency. Okay. Labor dispatch agencies also hire temporary employees as well. Okay. So generally those that will have less than a year contract. The third option is you can set up the relationship as an independent contractor, but then these individuals that you're hiring in China must have their own company. And the reason for this is that you have to have a service agreement where they act as an independent contractor. So that service agreement needs to be company to company, and they need to then be able to issue you a fapiao once you sign with them. The fourth option is using an employer of record service. Okay, so this is basically a corporate services firm that can hire people in the interim phase as you decide to see how you're growing and scaling the business. So it allows you to not set up your own company, but allows you to use a company, a corporate services firm, to act as the employer of record, handles the full payroll, reimbursement of expenses, etc., until you understand the development of the market and what you want to do next. My rule of thumb, generally speaking, talking to companies is, once you've hit around 3 employees that are under an employer of record service, you really need to think about setting up your own company. There are a lot of pros and cons of using the employer of record service. First of all, it allows you to have people on the ground, employ them legally, handle the payroll, etc. The downside to it, though, is that the mindset of those employees is not stable. They feel like they are in an interim solution where the company could one day from the next say, we're exiting the market and therefore you're out of a job. Whereas if you have your own company, it gives them a sense of stability. You're not going to leave from one day to the next, right? And what we have found with the employer of record is that if this service goes on for quite a few number of years, the employees start getting anxious and agitated saying, where's the future of this company going? We've grown this company, we've scaled this company, and they still don't want to set something up in China. For them, it just gets weird, and then they change jobs. And that's where then the turnover comes in. Okay. Now, the whole point of this conversation was to say, how do you recruit and employ your first employees in China? And usually that's where people will say, okay, well, that's all I need to know. For me, what's critical is actually once you've got that candidate on board and the employment is settled, is how do you retain them? Turnover in China is still quite high. How do you keep your employees interested in working with you? How do you prevent them from hopping from one job to the next that you have to then start from scratch again? So for me, this chapter now that we're talking about in the webinar is really the key one, is how do you settle your employees within your structure? And most importantly, how do you avoid the pain points that I had highlighted on the first slide today, right? So what I want your key takeaways from today to be are these next 2 slides. It's always remembering that you're a new employee. It was tough to find them. It was tough to interview them. It was tough to negotiate the contract with them. It was tough to sign the contracts with them. Now they've started their first day and you're like, okay, the job's done. No, that's where your job starts, right? That's where you now have to implement standard operating procedures with these employees to make sure you've got transparency and clarity, that you know what they're doing all day long, that there is loyalty and trust that's being developed and being built, that you have KPIs and goals that you're setting for them, that you have communication methodologies built into your calendar system, that you're talking to them daily, if not weekly, that business trips are being organized for you so that when you fly over, X and Y and Z is happening, right? So it's not mission accomplished on the first day. It's not mission accomplished once the probation period is passed. This is now where the hard work starts and the complexity starts to avoid those pain points. You've got to set up procedures to make sure that you're constantly in touch with them, that you know what is going on, and that you have transparency over the foundation of your business and the growth and the scaling of that business. Okay. We've all started fresh in new companies, right? I remember starting for my dad and my brother back in 2003 and being absolutely clueless on the first day of job. I knew what my dad did, but I did not know the nitty-gritty details of what he did on a day-to-day basis. And it did take me, honestly, about 6 months to a year of hands-on, rolling up my sleeves, getting my hands dirty, building my knowledge, working with clients one-to-one to really understand what he did, how I could sell our services, how I could maintain my staff. I had a hell of a lot of turnover back then. But you've got to understand that it takes anybody who's new into a business to settle in, okay? Especially an expatriate that's never resided in China before, or even a local mainland Chinese that has never worked for a foreign investor before. It takes time, okay? You're starting for a new company, you have to understand what the standard operating procedures are. Who do you have to reach out to? Who's the network within the organization about finance, HR, operations, supply chain, etc. It takes time to build that network, okay? And there are statistics out there that it does say that it takes a new employee almost a year to be fully productive within an organization. Now you've got to imagine, you're starting up fresh in China. You've just hired your first hires. It's going to take more than a year for them to settle, because the startup in itself is a chaos period, right? Where you're hitting roadblocks, you have to find solutions. There is no stability yet within the organization, and there still won't be stability as you grow and as you scale. So it's not like you're entering into an organization with 500 people and there are standard operating procedures from day one. No, this all has to be built for your new hires. Actually, they are the ones who are building it on your behalf. And that's where the settling in comes in. They're never really going to be properly settled, which is why you need generalists. You need people who have no egos. You need to share your vision and make them believers that through all of this chaos and building and creating the foundation and all of that, they stay, right? And ultimately, you need people who are going to roll up their sleeves, have the grit, and work hard, okay? And this is not easy, particularly if you are failing from your HQ side. Now, obviously, that's not good news for most people, because most people in their minds are thinking, I want somebody on the ground who can work tomorrow and get the ball rolling tomorrow. I did not say that they weren't going to get the ball rolling. I just said there isn't going to be stability within the organization. There are going to be constant amendments and readjustments. And the mistakes that I see my clients, that I have made and my clients have made, is that with the lack of communication with the decision makers, the ball doesn't get rolling fast enough. It is not the fault of the China team. The China team is waiting for these decision makers to say, yes, I agree with you. No, you've made a mistake. You shouldn't have done that. You need to respond immediately. And if you don't respond to your China team, they're going to get lax. They're not going to do the right things. And this is where things get then more complex, because you lose trust, you lose loyalty because they haven't followed you, but you haven't made decisions quick enough either. And this is where this whole bridge between HQ and China becomes vital. You want that solid bridge to be there where everybody is responding quick enough that the ball gets rolled, that the right decisions are being made, that the right foundation is being created, that you can then grow and scale. Okay. And like I said, the biggest challenge that people have, that I had with those first 1 or 2 hires, was one, keeping them interested in the organization, making sure that we kept getting new clients to keep the motivation high, right? Because I needed to retain them. I don't have time. I had time to train the first set. I did not have time to train the next set. When you hire those first hires, they're going to be the ones who train then the hierarchy that comes underneath them. If they leave, you're going to have to start from scratch. Okay. So now that borders are open, what I encourage everybody to do is have people swap places. Make sure that in the training phase, you are sending people from China to your HQ to meet the whole team, get networked, know who to talk to who about what, and send those individuals in HQ to China as well to understand the layout of the field and understand the complexities of just generally doing business, having client meetings, going to trade shows, whatever the case might be and whatever you might be doing. Okay. But you want your colleagues to have You want your colleagues in China to have a sense of what are your priorities, but you know what? They also want you to understand what their priorities are, because the goals may not always be aligned, right? And the KPIs may not always be aligned. So there has to be this alignment that comes there. To finish off today's presentation, okay, I am the first to admit, hiring those first hires and getting it right from the go is far-fetched, to be quite honest. It's hard. There's no jokes about that. It is actually really hard. The first person I ever hired, I let go after 7 months. It was a disaster. The second person I hired stayed until her retirement. Then when I think about the next couple of hires, most of them were in and out, had quite a bit of turnover, until you find the right person. It's really a hit or miss. I can't give you more than that. But quite frankly, having now lived in Europe for 3 years, I see the same issues here. It's a hit or miss, particularly when you're hiring millennials nowadays. Very different attitude, very different aptitude compared to the older generation. But I want to give you guys an action plan. And I don't want to be pessimistic about this, because it is a system process. You just have to have the right network to guide you in your sector and in your industry. That's why, again, one of the things I said about how to find them, you know, I know people don't want to spend money. I should have, back in the day, used recruiters and headhunters to help me start that process off, to guide me and educate me on what it is to look for people, how to interview people, what questions are being asked. I found that work invaluable. For me, I started from scratch. The grunt work that I had to do was so much that it took me away from focusing on the business. So obviously, with any China strategy, you should have set certain goals for the 3 to 5 year time frame. All right. When you've set those goals, that should guide you in terms of who do you need as people, creating that job description, creating that title, understanding what their goals, those individuals, people's goals are going to be. What are their skill sets that they need? Okay. You need to reiterate that information to those individuals, right? You need to be able to motivate them and say, these are the goals. I've set extremely high goals because this is where we need to be in this time frame, and you're going to help me get there. And we're going to have weekly meetings about whether we're reaching our goals, whether we have to pivot the business. You have to do this on a weekly, if not daily basis. Okay. And you have to, I've written here, you have to be disciplined to implement this. Okay. And don't forget about this bridge, because I can't emphasize this more. And now with the borders being open, there are no excuses. Send people from China over. Doesn't have to be for 1 month, it can be for 1 week. We had one client who's using the employer of record service. They sent their first hire to Germany for 3 weeks to meet the whole team, go on client meetings in Germany, understand marketing material, understand the philosophy of the company, understand what the goals and objectives are in the long term. This person met management and everything and came back. Now he's hired 2 extra people and he's sharing that vision with them. He's saving the cost of not sending those 2 people to Germany. It's not necessary. He's already gone. And now he is building up this team in China and passing on this vision to them. Okay. So he is that China end of the bridge. It's been created a solid foundation. And I believe he is almost daily in conversation with Germany, if not every 2 days. Different teams, depending on what is needed on that day. But he's made the network, he's gone out for dinners with them, he's built those relationships, has that guanxi, and that bridge, is very solid. Now, I will say, there was one moment where that bridge was slightly collapsing because probation period had been finished, and actually Germany didn't want to do a performance review yet. And that disappointed him because he wanted to understand in the 6 months that he'd been on board, had he rolled up his sleeves? Had he gone to the maximum effort that they were expecting? Did he overachieve? Did he underachieve? He wanted some guidance. And I think that's really important, this level of communication. Speak to your team. Are they doing well? Are they not doing well? And it doesn't have to be at the end of probation. Do it weekly. You know, I talk to my team, my subordinates, the people that report to me on a weekly basis to say, is everything okay with you? Are you still enjoying working with me? Is there anything I should be aware of? Is there anything I can do better? Right? And I also say sometimes there's something I would love you to improve on. So I saw this issue with this client. Could you work on that? By doing it weekly and having that level of communication, there's much more openness between the team and myself, preventing any issues that are arising under the surface and bubbling up to then have an explosion. I don't want surprises. That's something I'm trying to avoid. What I always recommend for smaller businesses is to have one main responsible person in HQ, which is in the majority case what we have, acting as the China market leader and acting as that then head of the bridge. So you have one person in HQ, one person in China, building that bridge, communicating on a day-to-day. Doesn't mean the others don't either, but these two are it's a critical partnership to make sure that bridge stays solid and stays doesn't break. Okay. Now, if you are finding that the people you are hiring, especially these first hires, are not producing the results that you expected, you first need to realize why. And if one of those reasons to why is because of those people, you need to act immediately. One of the biggest mistakes that I made, because I was so scared to rock the boat and because I was already spending so much time on HR issues, was not letting go of people that were lousy. Can you imagine? I waited 8 months to let go of that first person. I should have done it within the first month, within the probation period, and I didn't, because I didn't want to start from scratch again. I should have started from scratch again, right? Go with your gut instincts. If people are not producing the results, let go of them. Do not succumb to this fear of rocking the boat and this fear of, oh, I got to start from scratch again. It is better to start from scratch and get better results. It just means you're moving slower. We all get that, okay? But having the wrong people on the team, it just brings a bad taste to everybody's mouth. There were moments I didn't even want to communicate because I couldn't stand the people. So of course the communication wasn't there. Of course the transparency and clarity wasn't there. I just wasn't interested in talking to them. I didn't like them. It can happen. We're all people, right? You've got to find people that you want to work with, like to work with, who also motivate you just as you're motivating them. All right. We want to build this type of environment. So I hope I was able to help you. For those that are live and for those of you that are going to be watching this on replay, I hope I was able to help you understand the landscape in terms of finding those first hires, what you need to understand in terms of key considerations around labor law, how to employ them, what are the options to employ them. Remembering that the settling in phase is critical, especially if you want to avoid turnover, and make sure that you are sharing that vision with everybody, right? The key thing when I look for people, and this is something that I have now passed on to my senior management in Shanghai, as well as in Hong Kong, is I expect my staff to be flexible. I expect my staff to be open to doing things they've never done before and are willing to learn. If I hire only a tax expert who's never done bookkeeping, that brings me nothing when it is peak season and I need extra hands to do bookkeeping. And actually all this person is doing, sitting there twiddling their thumbs because it's not tax declaration season yet, right? If somebody is an expert only on HR issues and payroll, I still want them to understand a little bit about tax declarations that, again, they can help. So it's learning, creating an environment of learning from each other, being flexible enough to try new things. And like I said, for my senior managers, I do expect them in some instances to provide workshops to our clients in Chinese. So it's not even in a foreign language, but to then create presentations to be able to educate the clients. And for most of them being an accountants, they've never done presentations. They've got no idea how to do it, but they learn. And that's what I like. I want people to learn from each other and to be open to doing different things, from marketing, branding, doing workshops, to then doing different things within their fields and expertise. I hope today has helped you, and I would love to hear what your biggest takeaway from today was. If you are struggling to find or employ your first hires in China, do let me know. My marketing guru girl is on holiday, Claire. So she will be coming back at the end of this week and will then be uploading all of the last 3 YouTube videos, I believe, to our YouTube channel. So sorry for the delay on that. But I will be sending a link out also to those of you that would like to set up a call, discuss your pain points. We can see if we can then help and help you solve those pain points. We are now officially on hiatus. We are taking July and August off, particularly as most of you are anyway going to be on holidays. So our next roundtable will be on the 6th of September. I encourage all of you to watch our 21 roundtables that we've done thus far and review that information. That will keep you very busy during the summer holidays. We will start fresh on the 6th of September. We already have our topics highlighted here. And if you're interested, for those of you that are part of the community already, it's going to be the same Zoom link come September, same time and day every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central European time. So don't hesitate to join us. I want to wish everybody a wonderful holiday. Enjoy your summers. Hope it's not too hot wherever you may be. And I'll see you again in September. Take care and goodbye.